Hey, fellow GNTers, so it's like our spirituality with a twist. So, as you can see, if you're watching the video, we're here with good friend of the show, Rory Hiltbrand, to discuss one of the things that we've been kind of in the flow of discussing, transformation of anger, which seems like a very timely subject. And so we wanted to give an episode where we kind of talk through these ideas, especially maybe from a traditional Chinese medical point of view, a Taoist point of view, kind of share our thoughts and hopefully provide things that we all can find useful for ourselves. But the real inspiration for this episode started with our favorite Daniel
Our favorite Daniel,
and
the only one, but our
the
favorite
most
one.
favorite of our Daniels. And you had some inspiration for really doing this. They said it was really kind of personal. So we like to do personal. So, I think we'll start with that way of talking about it. So
Yeah, yeah. Rory, as always, thanks for joining us. Eric, thanks for being here. Audience, thanks
thanks,
for
Rory.
tuning in. As always, do the things that people ask you to do because it helps us out. We are trying to get seen as much as possible as everybody else is. So, like, comment, subscribe, share. All those things are definitely helpful for our work, and they cost you absolutely nothing, which is our favorite price in the world, free 99. Thanks in advance for doing all that. So, for those who are keeping up, this is kind of a continuation with what we had started last week, which is a discussion on the wood phase in Chinese medicine, the liver, the gallbladder, anger, frustration, all kind of put to the background of like the emotional plague, Wilhelm Reich's work on, society's, I don't know, madness, if you want to call this. And so we had kind of started the first half of our discussion on anger because anger, frustration is such a large emotion that I think a lot of people feel, right? Eric, what's the line from or Rory, you can give it to the line from the Neijing that they say about liver and our patients?
In Adults Treat the Liver is one of
That
the really famous ones.
Yeah, yeah. Which we've talked
Yeah.
about many times before, but I think amongst many interpretations of that line is the inherent irritability or frustration, lack of expression, observation that the sort of ancients had thousands of years ago when describing their adult patients. And that is something that should be treated so much so that they wrote it down. And it's been passed forward when they wrote very few things down, but they wrote that one down. So, you know, in describing this, I think we wanted to do a couple things, or I wanted to do a couple things. One, come at this from the perspective of, I wanted Rory's perspective in particular from kind of his like Taoist viewpoint. I wanted Eric's perspective in particular from, his clinical and teaching tradition, because Eric, you can speak for yourself on this, and Rory, because you guys both do a little bit more teaching than I do. Eric teaches far more in the university system. Rory is doing a lot of continuing education and things like this. But when you're learning something, there's a phase of observation. And Eric, I talked about this on our retreat. Shout outs to those people who were there on retreat with us in March. Thank you for coming. But when you're in a state of learning, your nervous system is kind of a little bit like not sure exactly how to react. So you're kind of in a little bit of a fight or flight. And so there tends to be a tendency for students in particular to be a little on edge, right? Because they're taking in new information that could be challenging to things that they held previously. They're sort of in a transformational process. You can't really express, you have to kind of just take in and then break it down and go forth from there. So, from a teacher's perspective, I wanted to ask you guys that part. And then the last part I wanted to talk about was just as a human being, as a human male living in our culture at this particular time in history when tensions seem like they're probably as high as they've been since, I'm not sure because I wasn't alive for that long, but they're very high to say the least. So these are the places that I wanted to go. And before we go to any of those spots, I wanted to give either of you the moment to say anything before as an elongation of my preamble.
You want to jump in on that, Rory? You want me to do that one first?
Sure. I mean, where do you want to start? Clinically, teaching?
I guess maybe like a little teaching thing. You got something you want to share, and I can kind of give my 2 cents, or vice versa.
Sure. So thinking about teaching, well, that brings me back to like, you know, in Chinese medicine school, everyone's so depleted, you're really using your spleen and the earth element we talk about in the way that we translate earth in the Dohan system is we don't translate it as like the planet Earth. We translate it as soil. and kind of the ground on which you stand. And so when there's a depletion of the earth element, it's slightly different from just that fear that we talk about. There's a sense of something missing. If you think about the earth as like within the cosmological view of the five elements, it's kind of like the glue between all of them. We process things, we, make narratives out of all of these intense and confusing emotions and string them together through this earth element. And so we're really tilling the soil there. But it's one thing, kind of like you were talking about the sensing, picking it up after you kind of, there's a difference between uh adopting, learning a theory and adopting it to the system.
Hmm.
So I think in time, clinically, you really get a better sense of what these things actually mean. And, I could talk about, I see it a lot in hyperinsulinism. I see it with patients as affecting the nervous system. They get that anxiety of like biting their nails and this feeling of like something's missing and there's a problem that needs to be solved. And I don't know, I can always go off on tangents, so I'll let you take it from what you were thinking, Eric.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about this when we were coming in the episode of what it means to be in the role of a teacher or something like that. But I suppose like what like happens with what that kind of like brings up for me is I do classes on like Chinese medicine and psychology, right? It's just part of what I end up teaching. I had like a psych degree before I went into our TCM world, and so this question has always been kind of deep for me. And so I end up talking a lot about anger. I do kind of buy the idea, if we get back to like different phases, you're kind of emphasizing the other phase. We'll talk about the relationship between earth and wood. Curious to hear how that gets visualized in the way you were talking about, Rory, because you're kind of presenting it like as soil. And I think that's a powerful way to do that. Right. And then I'll double back to you to hear what you think of the how the earth interacts with that. That's a cool thing to talk about. Right.
Mhm.
But I think, I do emphasize this idea of like in adults treat the liver, or there's this other classic saying that goes, the liver is the thief of the other organs, one of the other really great ones. And I guess if you translate that into um, emotional talk, as opposed to just talking about it as a physical system, but you get into like the internal aspect of this, right? That means in a certain way, anger is the thief of everything else or something, right? It can operate as a thief. And so I try to present students with that set of ideas, right? And then you try to like go, we all have our own emphasis of what we think is important diagnostically and clinically, but I do try to get that across to people and then how you can translate that out into, either concrete TCM treatments or just thinking about what it means to think about what it means to be a human being and think, okay, if this is going to be in some ways acknowledged as such an important emotion, right? Well, then, how do you think about that as a student of our field, right? You can always reflect on that in your own life. And I ask people to write papers of self-reflection at times, right? To go, okay, which of these emotions do you feel is like very prominent in yourself, right? And so you can get people to self-reflect within that, and then you can also get people to think about it like, okay, let's at least tentatively take this idea that this emotion is so strong as parts of Chinese medicine is saying, right? Then what does that tell us clinically? What does that mean in terms of how we're going to like think about that? And then also like psychologically, how does that change how we look at like, patients, but even ourselves or the people in our lives around us, right? If this
Mhm.
thing is such a powerful and potentially detrimental emotion. I had a little bit kind of we talked about it last episode, but you and I haven't talked about this, Rory. But I started off doing Zen. That was kind of my intro into this, and I had a Zen school that was like very Taoist oriented too. So I got kind of this combination of these two worlds. But certainly anger was considered to be one of the really potentially damaging emotions. So
Mhm.
that made sense to me when I heard these Chinese medical quotes. I hadn't heard those when I was a Zen student, but it was talked about in the Zen world, right?
Mhm.
And I bought in on the idea, like, yeah, I could see that because I already had the introduction through my Zen thing. Like, this is a very important thing to focus in on.
Mhm.
Yeah. I know what you think because you're presenting it as soil. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you think the relationship between the wood and the soil then goes and your way of framing things and your system? Is that
Sure.
an interesting subject for you?
Uh, Yeah, I mean, I mean, we can just kind of expand on that, just how maybe the Dohan system looks at it a little bit uniquely, kind of the five elemental emotions. And you know, it's interesting thinking about it, taking the pulse and thinking about that quote for treating adults, treat the liver. And so much of the time, so when we view the pulse, when we look at the Wei Qi field, that like the most superficial level of the radial pulse, we're thinking of that as their emotional state in real time. And so, so much of the time with adults, you see, at the guan, it's blocked off, not going to the sun, especially on the left-hand side. You see that liver gallbladder kind of pouncing and not moving forward. So we look at that as a diaphragmatic constriction.
So for Roy, just pause for a second for our non-Chinese medicine listeners, which is basically everybody. Um, on in just 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 to tell people. So when people go to the doctor, which less people are going to the doctor these days because there's not as much healthcare happening for people. But when people used to go to the doctor, they'll get your pulse. They take your pulse, right? And normally they take your pulse and they're counting, whatever, how fast, how slow. When you go see an acupuncturist, Chinese medical practitioner, that we're taking the pulse as well, but the pulse is being taken, yes, for speed, but there's far more tactile qualities that the radial pulse gives us, and it's not just on one side; it's on both sides, and each side has different, I guess, markers for internal happenings that give us as practitioners ideas as to what's going on. So somebody can come in and say, "Oh, I have a headache," or "I'm X," whatever the symptoms might be. We're going to then feel their pulse and try and get a sense for what's happening internally as to give an answer for why it is that they are feeling the way that they are feeling. So what Rory is describing henceforth is a description of that.
Through the magic of Chinese wisdom, they kind of realize like all the different parts of the body can reflect the whole. You can think
Mm,
of that kind of like holographically. And so you have to get your mind around that way of thinking, and and we're going for it in this episode.
hmm
So when
Yeah,
you
I
get
probably
that way, you go, I can feel things, I can learn about your entire body by looking at every individual part. And that translates down to even things that you can feel in the pulse, right? All the information is always there in each little spot. And then, you do get this idea that we can get information about what's happening in the internal organs by like different information that's happening under our fingertips, under our very fingertips,
And
right? So Rory's referencing that. Yeah.
Rory
Deep Chinese medical idea.
Eric studied with under Leon Hammer's main student or under the Leon Hammer's system. You know,
Dr. Karen Bilton, great lady from Australia. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Eric's taught some of these classes here, and there's some tricks, that in pulse taking there's tricks. One of which is for a mitral valve prolapse,
Mhm.
and I am 7 for 7 in my career for guessing that thing. So, for people who are listening to this, they're like, "What? That's bullshit. 7 for 7. That's 100%. I'm better than Shohei Ohtani," and he's
And he's the greatest. He's the GOAT.
And he is the GOAT for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So, anyways,
It
Rory,
is
we
kind of
didn't
wild
mean
when you
to.
think about that. I had like a tale, and I'm sure we all have our own tale, but I was like, we'll do it personal because we like to do it. But
Yeah.
I was at like like a, a camping trip, and it was all the adults were kind of drinking, maybe getting a little high, playing our guitars, singing some Johnny Cash songs. The kids were all running around, and I had a lady who's an anesthesiologist, and she came up and she said, "This Chinese pulse." Is bullshit," And I was like, take my pulse and tell me something. I was like, I don't want to take your pulse. It says nothing but bad things. It's not designed to like, reading your palm and
Yeah,
Yeah.
telling
yeah,
you about your
yes.
love life. It's like gonna tell you stuff that's wrong with your body.
Yeah.
And she
Yeah.
was maybe, I didn't realize, maybe a little bit of an ornery drinker. So she was insistent, and I went, okay, fine. And there's, again, Danny was talking about pulse taking tricks and techniques. And there's one that I know it comes a little bit more through like Jeffrey Yuen, Master Yuen, another figure in our field. And so I was taking the pulse, and you feel under your ring finger on the right wrist, and there could be indications of risk for like cancer.
Mhm.
And she had it, and I kind of froze in the moment, and like my semi-inebriated state. And I was like, oh, Jesus, I don't want to have to talk with her about this. But she looked at me very insistently. And then she said, well, what is it? And I said, well, you got this thing that could potentially indicate risk for cancer. What do you want me to say? And then she thought for a moment and she said, yeah, I'm getting these recurrent melanomas. And I said, yeah, like that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then she thought for a moment or two. And then she said, ah, this is still bullshit, and like stormed away.
Yeah.
And I was like, you can't, that's being a TCM doctor sometimes in the world, right?
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
matter what you say. But anyways, a little fun stuff to share on that kind of, she's okay
Well,
to the present day, but you can tell there's a power in this, and that's what Rory was talking about. So,
yeah, there's a reason we say, I got my finger on the pulse of something. It
mm,
really is
yeah.
some incredible, and that's with the tradition I came from. That's what got me into Chinese medicine was I watched Master Sung take someone's pulse and read out their entire life story from it. They had some genetic predisposition, they had a trauma at a certain age, you know, even cases like that too, where they didn't believe it and, you know, spelled it out. And so, yeah, and I have a bad habit of I tend to forget about the audience and I just speak to the people that I'm speaking to and things like this. So, yeah,
Yeah, it's all
definitely
good.
a canary in the coal mine for when so I'll try and keep it less technical. What I was trying to say was just reiterate clinically, we definitely see that, adults often their hearts are kind of closed off because they're blocked off
Hmm.
they have anger and resentment.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so just to get back to the 101 of the Dohan system, we don't when we learned like we would sit around maybe we would talk about the liver and so we talk about liver pathology, different treatment protocols, and then different herbal prescriptions. And so when we think about the organs, like for instance, when we talked about the heart, we were told, we learned the emotions of the elements in the context of yin and yang. So we were told to think about the heart as a sadness detector.
Mm.
When we learned about the kidneys, we were told to think about the kidneys as a fear detector. So why is the kidneys, associated with fear, but it's also our jur, our driving force that propels us into life? How is this petrifying force and this driving force the same? And it's because these opposites always go together. That's, fundamental Taoism, yin and yang theory is that yin and yang aren't two separate things. They're two parts of one thing. And so the heart, love songs are sad tones. We use them to evoke them. So within our medicine, we do things like futsa or lacquer, different poisons in order to increase health. Or in the Doan system, certain points for stopping bleeding can also start bleeding. Uh, we can use the same point that's used to clear heat to put heat in. It's effective both ways. And so when we think about anger is interesting because it's associated with the gallbladder and Shaoyang. And so when we had last spoke, I think I had shared with you some of this perspective of Shaoyang Qi being this ministerial fire, which we think of as being an analog of traditions like, Tumo or Shakti, basically this higher dimensional psychic fire, as
Hmm.
opposed to the imperial fire that begins in contact with the ground on kidney one, which we think of as our earthly fire. So when we were taught that when we felt anger, and it was inescapable, we should be grateful for our anger. So when someone pisses you off, and this is much easier said than done, but it's far better than falling into this deeply grooved pattern of returning back again to the soil, of it moving just laterally and controlling, going to the control element. So if you can move it into Shaoyang Qi, it will also move forward in the generating cycle into the heart. The anger becomes passion instead of just moving into the earth. And then the earth will divide it into both resentment, a narrative of resentment. I've been victimized, and also self-righteousness, with that victimhood, there's also a sense of redress that, a call to action that needs to be done. If there's not enough energy, the anger will move backwards into a insecurity into the kidney. So there'll be a
Mm,
reversal backwards. So it reverses the generating cycle. So that's what we were always told to do was basically, it's almost like the dark side of the force,
Mm,
using anger in order to increase that.
mm,
And in the same way, I talked about that the Shaoyang we talk of as subjective heat instead of objective heat of Shaoyin.
mm, mhm.
So Shaoyang, psychic fire, there's a big difference, and we could get into the weeds on this, but I think it's also a little too technical. But there's a big difference between caloric energy, a unit of thermal heat, and neuron energy. And so, that feeling of when you get so pissed off with rage, the
Yeah.
Libion rises, you feel hot, but it won't measure on a thermometer. That's this subjective heat that we feel.
mm, yeah.
So when we feel that, we need to move it up. We need to have gratitude, which moves it up, becomes passion. And that's like a lot of life force there. You think about, a lot of movies, a lot of action movies, it's all about, vengeance and
Mm,
revenge and
mhm.
passion. Um, and even think about some of the greatest, we were talking a little bit about sports. Think about, I was watching a Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance. Did you guys see that?
Yeah, I watched it
Yeah.
during the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a heck of a thing.
He's the
Uh,
show for those who don't know who Michael Jordan is. He's the Shohei Ohtani of basketball.
Yeah.
I actually don't follow baseball too much, but so I'm a little behind on the dark on that one. But in that documentary, he people talk about like I played this game with him and he came up to me and he would make up fictional, totally fabricated stories of how people wronged him
Yeah.
in order to have more energy to go and passion to play these games. And so that's a case of him really using this. And you see it in a lot of like some of the greats, you can see this same pattern of using this, dark side of the force, I'll call it, using anger in a way that you're channeling it instead of it becoming self-destructive into the earth element, victimhood, all that.
Kind of awesome because I kind of wrote it down for my notes. I was thinking about what might we be talking about in this, and I was thinking about my son,
Hmm.
who is now 13. And I remember we had conversations about I taught him the emotions in the five phases, from a TCM point of view. And I said, okay, here's your emotions. And we talked about anger, and I think he was dealing with kids at school who were screwing with him and how do you handle that and what do you do, and the
Hmm.
anger that comes from those experiences. But we had conversations just about anger just in general. And I like I love what you're saying there because I agree with it. You can take those emotions, and one way of framing that is you take them and you move them from wood into fire in Chinese medical thought, right? You go from the wood phase and you don't let it stick there. Almost what you were describing when you were talking about your diagnostics with the
Hmm.
pulse taking. You have one pulse that's more associated with the liver and anger, but it won't connect to the next one, right?
Yeah,
It won't
exactly.
connect into the heart. And the positive attributes of the heart is sort of passion, creativity, or you can say joy, right? Or if you want to get really into the tantra of it, Jin and Tantra is our podcast, the bliss of things. So if things get stuck in that wood phase, okay, not so good. But if you can figure out a way to translate those into the joy
Hmm.
of the heart. And I was trying to tell him that that's what you have to learn how to do. You
Hmm.
can't let it get stuck here. You have to let it go through into this more beautiful place, right? The passion, and those kinds of feelings, and joy too. One of my mentors, Master Wang, Dr. Shangli Wang, made a big deal about this too. He talked
Hmm.
about like this idea of transmitting the emotions into joy, right?
Hmm.
We can do that with anger. There's a kind of classic Chinese medical saying that also goes, joy is the antidote to all the negative emotions, right?
Hmm.
But special relationship with anger, even like, can you learn how to take that anger and transmute it into something that becomes the fuel, like you were talking about, Rory, of something that is passion, creativity, and so on. Sometimes I guess it's a dark side of the force. If you're like a great athlete, they kind of use that. And I think they kind of know on some level they're playing psychological games with themselves and with others, and a lot
Yeah.
of times at the end, everyone will like give each other a hug and a tap on the behind when the game is over and everyone
Mm.
walks away.
Mhm.
But it's a creative use of those emotions, you could say, right? And that's Tantra and Taoism and these things too. Yeah.
Well, Eric, we were discussing last time about the aspect of benevolence in the wood
Hmm.
phase, and just like Rory, what makes me think about this is Rory was talking about the sort of seeming dichotomy between in the water phase, which is fear on one hand, but then will, drive, push on the other hand, as being the total opposites in that particular phase. And so on one hand, you have anger, and then you have benevolence. And anger almost inherently gives rise to what Rory was talking about, like revenge. These kind of like actions that are, I don't want to say tainted, but highly influenced by retribution for doing, being the, transforming the victim to the victimizer, which is in a sense of empowerment, even if it's just mental. Even if you just think of have revenge thoughts, it's still moving that cycle laterally as opposed to continuing the same cycle. But the harder thing to do, which is much harder thing to do, is in a state of anger, um, move to do something for somebody else. Move to a state of benevolence, which if you're doing it for someone else or in a communal sense, then you are automatically moving then into the fire phase because that has the aspect of spreading, the aspect of giving, in a sense. And if you can use, Roy, I like how you brought that up, this idea of or the sense of gratitude for what it is that you're experiencing, then you might free up some of the influence that anger might have on your actions that would make you do something maybe slightly more negative to something that you can do that's positive, which will a help other people, but more importantly, more selfishly as human, help ourselves in the process deal with whatever it is that we are dealing with that brought us to that particular place.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. Well, I feel like, it's not just in our perspective of Taoism, these elements being a small subcategory of the numerics. It's not just, applied to the human body or emotions, we can call it medicine, but we really view it as life itself. So naturally, we go through all of these experiences and they follow this kind of trajectory. We're often spooked into anger, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and if you're driving and someone comes in or you make a mistake, you'll often be if someone scares you, your next thing is, oh, you bastard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's very natural to follow these cycles. And so you can go any direction. Like, just fundamentally, you can use the control cycle. If you're very resentful or angry about someone and you get a call, hey, your dad just died, immediately that grief will dry that resentment. It will
Mhm.
put things in perspective and you will not, I can't believe I even felt that way. And so and these things are happening all the time. And we can think about wood itself when we look at it in its yin and yang pairs. It's anger, which is this destructive force,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's creativity. You think of it as creativity. So a lot of times I would think about Beethoven when I almost like this classical rock star, like dun 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 dun, like kind of aggressive, but also creative. Or if you look at, the greatest technological advancement is during times of war, or if you look at the physiology of the liver itself, there's two, it stores the blood. There's two aspects of the blood. We have the red blood cells and the white blood cells, or killer cells, we call them, and then our, nutritive yin qi. Um, Understanding the earth a little bit deeper, when we think about the earth element in the Dohan, we also kind of view it as like a time time extender, time release. So if we, when we process our emotions, we're digesting them over time. It's not just one sharp experience. If I want to kind of soften the energetics of a formula and release that therapeutic signature over time, I'll add like Gansao to the formula,
which is licorice.
licorice to a formula, which is earth element you could think of. And so if you notice, if you are very resistant to anger and you're thinking, then obviously you have this narrative of, oh, anger is bad, and you're struggling with all of these internal conflicts of anger going on. So you're moving into that earth element, your diaphragm's blocked off. There's a wall to protect your heart from that pathogenic chi, pathogenic stress. And so it actually, if you're okay with being angry, it doesn't last very long. It's when you really are, you can't stand being angry and you can't stand that you've made me angry, then, it will last much longer.
Hey, Rory, 1 second, because your screen is making me angry right now. So we're going to pause
Yeah.
just for one moment.
All right. So,
Maybe Rory, I just have to say something about the Beethoven thing. I can't let that go
yeah,
because he really was a really aggressive piano player.
yeah, yeah,
And I saw the Who recently with my son, smashing the instruments, you know. I heard the story. I love music too, and he would sometimes leave like the piano in tatters.
I didn't
So he
know that,
was
but
like
I can
original
imagine.
punk
Yeah.
before it was, but like
Yeah.
apparently he beat the
Wow.
shit out of the piano to the point where he'd be like, it's not obvious this thing is playable afterwards.
Yeah,
And
you can
and it was like
hear it.
really powerful, So even like physically he would do that, and but that creative power that he directed through that. And if I could just add say one other thing, because it's so funny because I think we had a lot of the same thoughts or
Uh-huh.
would produce the same thoughts because I was thinking about we talk about like ways in which energies can kind of relate to one another, and you kind of brought up this idea of like what we'll call metal, right?
Uh-huh.
Associated physically with the lung, and how that can interact with anger. And you talked about sadness and grief. You hear, oh my God, something bad happened to someone that maybe I had these bad feelings about, and that all just dissipates so clearly and so quickly, right? I'm kind of interested in the virtues of these phases. There's lots of systems for the way we talk about it in the Chinese medical world and the Taoist world, but I tend to associate metal with things of fairness, you know,
Just
justice and fairness.
yeah.
And, again, different associations for different people, and it's all good. But if you go to that one, that's sometimes a way of dealing with anger too. If you put
Hmm.
yourself in the spot of going, okay, well, let me really think through this. Like, what's just and fair in this, or whatever words we want to use for that. And sometimes that can help control the anger too, because you realize, oh man, in the heat of the moment of that anger, I really felt like I was right. Anger
Hmm.
has that quality to it, right?
Hmm.
And then in the moment where you take a step back and you go, well, let me like see if I can control this. And a lot of times we'll do this even, you don't have to know Chinese medicine even sometimes to do these kinds of things. You start thinking, okay, what was really happening here? Is what I'm saying really fair and just, in the way I'm thinking about it? And you can walk away and realize, oh no, it really wasn't. And then that kind of calms you down in its own way. Anyways, I just wanted to throw that out. I thought it was really great because a lot of the same ideas were coming through. We have nuances of how we think about it, but even though I
Yeah.
was jotting down my notes, I was like, oh, same things, and you're bringing up all the same stuff too. So it's kind of
Yeah.
brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. It's great to cross-pollinate. You're kind of making me think about just in being on opposite sides of that chart. Kind of, I mean, we have yin and yang in every direction, but there's almost like an astringing, tensing up quality to anger. And
Yeah.
when you get angry, your diaphragm constricts.
Mm.
You'll feel that constriction blocking off that energy from the heart. Often it will, especially if it's moving into the spleen. Um, but in the lung, especially like that grief, just, even knowing people close to me who've died recently, there's such a spaciousness in sitting in that grief. There's a stillness and spaciousness that's very contrary, oppositional to that astringent, tight, holding on control energy of anger. Now I'm thinking of there's an old uh, anecdote, parable, whatever you want to call it, from that the Dohan have been telling for hundreds of years from master to student. This is one of the first stories I heard to help me wrap my mind around the importance of yin and yang in physiology and Chinese medicine is when you die, if someone dies, if you cut them open immediately and you take out the liver will have like a slightly green hue, a fresh liver. You'll see some of that bile kind of shining, shiny, metallic kind of greenness to it. So it's exhibiting that color of that energetic. You cut out the lung, you take the lung. If you both put them in water, the liver will sink and the lung will float. And so, as Taoists, it would be so satisfying if they matched, if the liver would float and the lung would sink. But if you wait 3 days, suddenly the liver floats to the surface and the lung sinks. So after this period of time, once there's decaying of the cells and there's death of that energetic, it exhibits that opposite force.
Hmm.
And so the moral of the story is that all of these organs, all of, the internal struggle of oppositional forces is in fact the state of living. And I know you're into physics too. It's kind of like you know, the I'm spacing on the name now, but in Hawking,
Almost like a supersymmetry, right? You need like
yeah,
complementary opposite forces, right? That's
yeah,
just how nature works, right?
exactly. I was thinking of a
Yeah.
specific example from quantum field theory of some type of particles that exist in such small time frames that they're
Oh,
called
muons, things like that. The
it's,
muons and the little
it's
tiny little, they show up in the chamber and then they're gone.
not just muons. I'm talking these pairs of positive and negative, so like the particle and
Yeah.
antiparticle
Antiparticles. Yeah.
that appear
Supersymmetry theory.
in quantum fields.
Hmm. Oh,
Um,
yeah.
That's
Well, the
okay.
theory of supersymmetry in any case, we got it for
in any
people.
case,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
these
Supersymmetry. Hmm.
in the quantum field constantly, in empty space, these particles emerge, that in these pairs.
Oh, yeah.
And
They do come off in pairs. Yeah. 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 Hmm.
yeah, yeah. So in perfect symmetry, they have this energetic balance. And then in the case of Hawking radiation, the negative energy goes into the black hole. And so it has Hawking radiation. So they actually do exist, not virtual particles.
Okay.
Again, so
But they're
virtual.
actual.
Yeah, so they were called virtual because they exist at such minute timescales that we thought we'd never see them. Then Hawking predicted that we'd have radiation because of them, because of the intense gravity near the. So, I mean, that's just to say that it's not, it's also the very structure of this, life itself is, you can look to, yeah, supersymmetry.
Reminds me a little bit, we're all riffing on it, but it reminds me a little bit of like sometimes in the Tibetan tantric world, you have this idea of Dzogchen,
Okay.
which is
No.
like great
Everything.
perfection, you know, great perfection. And it's kind of the idea like all these things are going to exist on some level, right? And so these, what we could sometimes say would be the negative emotions, if we get to the emotional part of it, are like inevitable.
Mm.
They're just embedded into the fabric of things themselves, right? And if you can recognize that part, John was talking about that. These oppositions are in the fabric of reality,
Yeah,
right? They're
yeah,
like
in a
woven
sense.
right into the fabric, right?
Yeah, it's
That we
it's a
exist
kind
within.
of yeah, it's its own perfection. And I feel like once you really adopt this view of yin and yang, not as, you know, as husband and wife, we fight to stay together. You know what I mean? The when you can appreciate the sad tones of a love song, like, in your most tender moments when you cry, if you can, the greater the negative force that you can hold and embrace, like excitement is the embrace of fear. the embrace
Mm.
of danger. And so the excitement that you can experience in your life is totally symmetrical, proportional to the amount of fear that you can hold.
That was like sort of at the heart of Zen training. It's interesting that you say that because I had that experience going through that. I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry about
No,
that.
no, you're good. Yeah,
But
yeah.
like, I was like, it was so amazing to me because I was in my 20s. I was a younger guy. I grew up in a house where there was a lot of anger, so I had to deal with those emotions, but fear too. I grew up in a house that was kind of violent.
Mhm.
And what I realized is I was doing that training, which isn't easy. You could. It was more of a spiritual marathons if you do the Zen retreat rather than like what people think.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not. It's not like an easy time out in the woods and
yeah,
people are playing flutes and
yeah, yeah,
it's not like that. It's intense, right?
yeah.
Japanese, hence intense. But spiritual training can be intense and it can be good for you, right? And I
Mhm.
had exactly that thought. I realized like, wow, this is like it's almost like if we get to some of our physicsy kind of speak, it's almost like being a capacitor, right? How much capacity do I have to
Mhm.
Mm.
hold this? And my greater capacity it is for me to hold these things, the more I'll be able to actually live, right? And it'll translate into, activity and the joy of living and the overcoming of the fear that keeps you away from experiences and all this wonderful stuff. But it has to do with, do I have the capacity to hold
Mhm.
that? And part of the training was I realized like, oh, that they're increasing my capacitance and increasing my capacity and increasing my capacity, and the more you can hold of that charge in a way, the more you can be alive, right?
Absolutely. That's really how we view Tai Chi, medicine, life. The more yin and yang you can separate and hold, the more life you have. And we say your capacity is mediated by your sanjiao. So I told you this perspective. Basically, how much nerve do you have? When you say someone's got a lot of nerve, they can handle more life. They can go deeper into the fear. And somehow just that understanding of, when you have that negative emotion, you're not as far from the positive as you may think. And when you can blend them together, like when you can, you know, be, at the birth of a child and feel that sweet heartbreak and simultaneously with this incredible love, you see that they're not meant to be separated. It's a coming of together that's really this, you know, Tao. This is the I that binds them together.
So we probably got about 15 minutes, before we have to depart for this evening. And with this last section, I wanted to give a bit of a premise and then look at this from we've kind of done the teacher, philosopher sort of, medical perspective. And I want to keep in that vein, but now maybe shift towards a practitioner patient relationship. Okay. And the premise is this. And this is, and also this is the kind of human part, right? Because we're people and we study these things, and this is how it works in an ideal. There's no forces around us. We can say these things, and it works well. But sometimes within us, it's hard to find the gratitude when you're, really inebriated with the sense of anger or frustration, or you're inundated with it constantly, or you have it coming from numerous fronts. It's difficult to kind of parse, but the goal is still to work towards that. So that's in a good spot. So I see patients, Eric sees patients, Rory sees patients. And we would be lying if we didn't give some observation, some moment of observation for the world that we are currently in right now. The political climate, the societal climate, the immense amount of division, the immense amount of violence, the immense amount of acri- um, acrimoniousness that exists, right? It's very, very high, very high. Some people don't view other people as human beings. They don't, we have a hard time agreeing on like basic rights, like peoples are human. They deserve, the opportunity to succeed or fail based on their own whatever, right? So people are feeling all kinds of ways about all different kinds of topics now. And, one reason for this, I think, is definitely social media makes things worse. The isolation is increased. The opportunity for people to find others who have similar weird views and then gather in little clusters and say, "Did you read this? Did you read this? Did you read this?" They get their news from memes, which is like the weirdest shit. No source, no nothing, just a picture of a cat and some random bullet point that somebody made up. They're like, yeah, I fucking, people reacting off obvious fake AI videos. Like, I knew that's bullshit. You're like, it actually is bullshit. It's not real. You should probably pay attention to this. But I feel personally, and I believe that you all see it in the clinic because I definitely am, the sense of increased pervasiveness of life, outside life, societal life, communal life, in people's personal lives because everybody's being affected by things. Where I think for a long time there was this idea that, like, oh, what are you worried about? It's not affecting your life. Why do you care? Why do you care? Why do you care? And the poem that not many people knew about, now everybody knows it, right? At first they came for the whatever, the communists, but I didn't care because I wasn't a communist, and they came for the laborers and I wasn't a laborer, so I didn't care. And then, so on and so forth. And eventually they came for me and there was no one left to save me. So this kind of thing of, like, ever increasing rings of stress and things like this that are kind of surrounding people now, that are touching people's lives in a negative way. I find that there is a far more increased sense of angst, sense of frustration, sense of anger, sense of irritability. I have not had, personal road rage has not been an issue for me for many years. I felt like if I was going to be a kind of well-balanced person who was meditating and doing my thing, that, like, I shouldn't be afflicted by somebody driving like an asshole. Like, that's there. You know what I mean? And we can all watch traffic and how people get overwhelmed by, you know, being 4 minutes behind where they were supposed to be. Okay, fine. I have noticed for myself over the last couple weeks, man, I'm begging people to get out of the car. Begging, begging. Please get out, sir. Please, sir. I would love to put your teeth on the ground. I think you've been paying health insurance for all these years. You've never used your benefits. Now is the perfect time for you to see how good those coverages actually are. And the fact that I have had multiple experiences where, people are looking at me and I'm looking back at them, and this, I'm like, okay, this is a thing. I am not an unregulated person. Of course, I'm not devoid of emotion, but also I'm like, this is weird. This is something extra. Then of course, everybody has eyeballs. They can watch the news and decide what they want to react to, and have some kind of feelings about. So I wanted to ask your guys' thoughts with our last, 10, 15 minutes here, based on this premise, on how you are, if you are seeing this in your clinical practice slash personal life, whatever you want to choose to discuss, as, for value for those who are listening, as to say, yes, I see this, or no, I don't. And then if I do, what can I glean from what I'm seeing, and how do I help people who are coming to me for guidance, being a human, being a male in this society, and trying to navigate all these difficult waters that, are representative of other cultures in the past who have navigated it, but then also we didn't do it ourselves. So all that we have is tales and books and teachings from other people who did, and now we're trying to implement it for ourselves authentically, passionately, but also making mistakes as we do it. You know what I'm saying? So, I've given sort of my, mid-stage preamble. I guess it's a post-amble at this point, and I wanted to hear what you guys think, because I'm genuinely interested in both of your thoughts. That's why I have you both here this evening. So, I'm playing three-dimensional chess.
You want to go first, Rory, on that, or you want me to take a tumble at that, or how do you want to do it? I'll throw it
You,
to you since you're the guest in the house.
you go first this time.
I get to go first this time. I'm not sure if I went first last time or not, but it's okay.
Yeah.
I joke. No, I was smiling when you were talking, Daniel. I was like, had the mic off, because I want to like create any sound over like you're sharing your thoughts and your feelings about that. But I was smiling. So if you're not watching the video, you wouldn't see that. But I've actually heard that exact thing from other people where they'll say like, yeah, I'm waiting for somebody to say something wrong, and I'm gonna hop out of the car because I'm so I feel it so deeply,
Mm,
and it's complicated times, obviously, right? And I'm living in Chicago, and it's complicated times in Chicago for us, right? Like we got military helicopters that are right outside my window right now, right? that are kind of swooping by. Um, uh, so yeah, it's like kind of deep as I look at it in my life where I'm seeing it. Definitely, I think I feel like I see it with just people in my personal life. I see it with people that I treat, depending on how close they are to, however things are affecting them. And then I deal with a lot of students, right? I have a lot of students from different parts of the world and people who are scared, right? So all of that's very real, I think. Um, the dealing with it is interesting. We've been kind of talking about what to do with some of these emotions like the whole way through. Fear and anger are like probably the deepest emotions that you're going to have within these
Mm-hmm.
contexts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you start handling them? As I was jotting down my notes for this, I started thinking about the Tibetan cultural experience of this too, because I have connections to people from that part of the world, right? And how they had to deal with, the really strong feelings. One of the stories I found to be inspiring, and I try to think about it in my better moments, was the Dalai Lama talking about his meditations around like Mao Zedong, and you're right in the midst of something, so deep happening, and he's in a position of responsibility and also like deeply interconnected. And if you all seen the movie Kundun, did you see it? The Scorsese movie about the Dalai Lama? No, so I'm not so much. It's an amazing scene in it where the Dalai Lama is realizing like, oh, we're in real trouble. There was a sort of, I guess, a political thing that happened where they were trying to kind of like influence the Dalai Lama's brother to turn on him. And the Dalai Lama in the movie, it's very powerful because he says like, oh, that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with something where there's an element of like they think my brother's going to turn on me if they offer him money and things. It's a powerful scene. So the Dalai Lama talks about this, having to go through and deal with these very powerful emotions and these very heightened, political situations. And he talks about, having to do one of the classic practices, almost what you were talking about, Rory. Can I open up my heart so much that I can even hold the openness to the people who are on the opposite sides of such a, an existential conflict like that? But can I do it? Can I be open enough? And there are meditations that Daniel and I have talked about when what you were talking about, the opening of the heart and then allowing feelings of love and compassion to happen, even for people where that's very difficult, right? But the thing he says that's so interesting about that is that the moment you're able to do that, the first person who really benefits in the irony of things is like you. You're the one who benefits because that closing of the heart is, so non-productive for human beings. It cuts you off from so much powerful subjective possibility and love and creativity and the things that we were talking about that kind of come when that flow is able to happen more. So that's, I mean, the start of a reaction, right? In one of my classes, I try to teach this meditation to students then. I was doing this before, I've been doing it for years because it's a sort of a quintessential one. You were talking about the three parts of the body, the triple warmer idea in Chinese medicine. You can divide the torso up in these multiple parts. And if you can open up this upper part, like open up your chest and let the diaphragm move, and let that be free, it's so much easier to get into these more positive emotional states of love and creativity and joy. And, so I mean, there's meditations around this that we've worked through, but that whole idea of doing that is like so powerful. And the first person who's going to benefit from that will actually ironically be you, right? When you're able to do that, right? Even if you find yourself in conflict and opposition, even conflict and opposition that's justified, right? But still, you have to be able to find that space somehow. It's an ideal, right? That we can strive towards. Not easy, but something that's an ideal that also be ultimately is a benefit to ourselves, right? And the people around us who we love and care about. Anyways, that's some thoughts on it. It's a deep conversation, Daniel. Thanks for opening it up. It's not
Mm.
easy, but at least that's some thoughts. I know
Mm.
you have things on that too, Rory.
Yeah, I love that, Eric, and I could feel not just you speaking about it, but touching into it too.
Mm-hmm.
There's such a power to understanding that it's not that we need love from anyone, although that's great, but in loving, you are like a great king. You can you that's where the joy is when you're loving to others. And so that's part of the pain I feel like is because the anger is so dividing and separates us and we feel so alone wronged. Um, it all just feels wrong. And so it reminded me of a really powerful experience I had in a meditation retreat, like you had said, where I went so deeply into my heart and I saw this saint's face in my heart, and it said that everyone's face is in your heart. It was like I heard my heart speak.
Mm,
And, I could spout platitudes at you about, this and that, but the truth of it is that it's difficult. And yeah, if someone came into my clinic talking about that clinically, I'd talk to them and again, platitudes. But I try and be the change that I want to see in the world. And
mm,
I don't know what much more that I can do
mm,
aside from that. I'm not sure. Maybe you guys have more of that in Chicago. Maybe there's more going on. I'm in a suburb of Philadelphia. I'm closer to Lancaster, farm country.
mm,
So a lot of what I'm treating, like their main concerns are their physical ailments, if they have cancer or a very sick, very, very sick child, or
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and those things kind of eclipse anything else going on societally. But um,
But you
Some of that
understand. You get
some
it.
of that is like humane communication too. When you talk about the heart, what I've been trying to do is like even with people, like I'll have family members and I'm we haven't historically been on the same sides of some of these political divides in the country, but I am reaching out, right? And I'm trying to do it and for our conversations about the heart and openness and and things of love. I'm like reaching out and I'm being honest. I think that's fair that you have to be honest about things, but at the same time, I'm making the point of like, let's reach out, let's talk, let's connect, right? And that's
Mm-hmm,
another way of trying to create some healing around these things. Because I mean, it depends on where you're at in the world and how much this is like hitting close to home or something,
mm-hmm,
But I have my one cousin and we're not in the same sides of the political spectrum of things, but I purposely reached out to him and said, "Hey, let's start talking again," right? And part of that's honesty, emotion of the heart, be honest, be open, be authentic, right? But also be loving and caring and in the context of not letting the wood elements dominate, not to be confrontational, but to be honest and try to connect. And sometimes that's about things that are happening because I want them to know what the experiences are, that are closer to us who live in Chicago or something like that. But also it's like, we were talking about how the Bears got their ass kicked yesterday in football, or I should say on Sunday, not yesterday, Monday, it's the hangover of the Bears goes all the way into Monday when they get their asses kicked, which is not infrequent. So, other ways of trying to connect with people. Yeah. The other part that I guess that I had in the notes here, I don't know what you all think. When you get to the anger thing, it's such a powerful emotion and it can be negative, but can you direct that into proactive activity? And in the Buddhist Tantra, there's the idea of like powerful action where you're not just being stuck in it, but you do something powerful, but powerful in a way that's productive too, not in a way that's destructive. But can you direct those things? So, sometimes they'll talk about the use of like forceful activity or powerful activity that we would probably associate with the wood phase in many ways, and they do too. But you direct it in ways that are not destructive. You're directing it in ways that are trying to be proactive, And I think I'm trying to do that, and I think I'm trying to talk with other people about doing that, you know. And and it does happen with students, where we'll talk about this too, and like, can we have constructive conversation around these things? And I think it's helping, in whatever ways it can help, you know. Mm. I'm kind
Yeah.
of a big one of the things we hit on in some of our episodes before was to communicate. And even if you have a diversity of ideas and you have dissent, just hearing someone else say something like, okay, let's talk this through and we don't have to argue about it, but you just hear a different opinion and it can start to crack. It's part of social psychology too, right? And maybe we can, like, through our communication, that's what we're hoping to do through the podcast, through the communication, it starts to create little reverberations of people feeling, okay, let's talk. And maybe our minds can change and grow just through that experience of talking, like we did in this very episode. As we get to the end of it, we learn from one another, right? Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Rory, you got any last party shots?
Well, yeah, I think that's so important. Is just making the connections. I feel like when you're stuck in that anger phase, there's this, we become prickly. We kind of isolate from the other. And I think communicating, making bridges, the dam has to crack at some point. And so moving into that vulnerability, moving into the hurt instead of the aggression is, I think, so powerful too. Just really feeling the hurt of the situation and, you know, holding that out to someone.
Mm,
Can because when you talk to someone, if you can really connect from there instead of, making someone wrong. I'm thinking in my own relationships, if you feel like you've been wronged, sometimes you isolate and you become prickly and you become short with the person. But really what you want is to connect, and you're holding yourself in that energetic. And sometimes it just takes, even just a touch on the shoulder, some type of energetic connection. Any advances towards that, I think, is a big step for the floodgates to open.
yeah.
And maybe it's like the drops of water. If the drops of water keep falling, eventually you get more and more water collecting, and that's what can open the floodgate, hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah,
Yeah, I like the metaphor you're talking about. Eventually the dam has to break, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get more
Or
things going
just
on. Little drops of water, and the water will eventually build, right? And that's how you get stuff going.
yeah,
We get to better places. Yeah.
yeah, or the dark side of the force, like Daniel was talking about, and check their medical insurance.
That's another
Some,
route.
you know what
That's for
I
all
mean?
the
I wouldn't
flowery
advise
talk.
that one.
You know what I'm saying? Let's see that insurance card, boy. You know what I mean?
That's very thoughtful of you, Daniel.
Yeah,
First, you
that's
want to see
right.
the
Oh, you're
insurance
good.
card.
You're good, right?
Okay,
Yeah,
here's the
You're
card.
covered,
Where's
right?
your insurance card before I
Uh-huh.
clock in?
yeah.
You have
Good.
insurance? Okay, I wouldn't want to
Very
put you in trouble.
Yeah, no.
Wow.
heart-centered and
I'm trying to give you a hard physical time, not a hard financial time. I got a heart, man. You know what I mean?
That's Buddhist compassion in action, Dayton. Daniel. Right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Buddhist
Thank
compassion
you.
in action. Or
Yeah,
show me your
that's
insurance
right.
card. Decent coverage. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Okay, fine. Not bad.
I can open the whoop ass.
Did you
Okay, I
get this
wouldn't
on
put you in this spot
Marketplace?
otherwise.
Really? What's your deductible? My God, it's amazing.
uh,
Oh, all right. Well, Eric, thank you so much
Yeah.
for always joining us. Rory, a pleasure to have you on, my friend. We look forward to when your book comes out, and we'll
Yeah.
early shout out for that, but we'll have you on to talk about that once we get a little bit closer to that project being released. And thank you
Actually,
for your
definitely, Rory, all my TCM people who like our participant. I have lots of students who listen to this. So I definitely want to hear you talking about that. So we'll do it. We'll get as technical as you want, right? For
yes.
oh,
those folks, and we'll go
Yeah,
for it. But thanks so much for
I
coming
won't
on.
hold you
Greatly.
back with the general audience at that point, Rory. We'll let you just
cool, cool. Yeah,
yeah.
that's my big thing. The essentials of the perfect numbers. That's what I'm calling it
Okay.
Oh, awesome.
for 66 of the Sulan.
Great.
We'll make it.
Great,
Yeah.
Thank
great.
you guys so much.
Yeah.
It was fun, and it was also touching. So I didn't expect that. So
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you
Well,
for coming on, Rory. Greatly
thanks so
appreciate
much,
it.
audience. Thanks for tuning in. If you want to get a hold of us or Rory, please feel free to hit us up at ginandtantra@gmail.com. Leave a comment in the YouTube section or somewhere else, wherever you might be listening to this, Apple Podcast or whatever, Messenger Pigeon or some shit. Also, we're on the gram at the Gin and Tantra Podcast. And Rory at Four Mountains Clinic. If you happen to be local to the Philadelphia suburbs area, please feel free to seek out the services of one Dr. Rory Hiltbrand. He's a fantastic practitioner and has a very lovely clinic. And yeah, thanks for coming on, everybody. I appreciate you guys. For Eric and Rory, this is Daniel. We'll catch everybody on the next one. Peace.